Emily Cain, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you, especially this year.
Yes, this is quite a year. And you were the executive director of Emily's List for a long time. And I want to talk about the importance of women in this election, which seems like it's, Captain Obvious, but it also seems reductive. But it's really special at this moment in time, and it's taken a lot of work. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. So for me, I come at this conversation as someone that not only spent nearly 6 years as the executive director of Emily's List, and for those who are listening, Emily's List is the nation's largest resource for women in politics. It is not named for me. It is actually an acronym that stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. It makes the dough rise. And since its founding in 1985, Emily's List has been working to elect Democratic pro-choice women to office up and down the ballot. And it is an organization that has elected, all of the Democratic women, with the exception of LaFonza Butler, who was most recently appointed to the Senate, the former president of Emily's List. In fact, Emily's List has helped elect or elected or has ties to every Democratic woman elected in her own right into the United States Senate, which is pretty amazing. Plus the majorities that were elected in 2018 and the diversity of the women in the House. But that legacy goes back, more than 30 years to 1985. And some women who got together because they saw a need for women to change the way the system worked. And that is really, so I bring to it that perspective, but also the perspective of someone who 20 years ago this November was elected to office for the first time at the age of 24. And when I got elected, there were not even 25% women in the Maine legislature. And it is amazing to me now that we have state legislatures across the country, some of which have majority women legislatures, majority women caucuses. Right? That was not fathomable 20 years ago. And so there's a lot that goes into a moment like this and a lot of history that gets us here.
Well, not only is there history about paving the way for women to be in office, there's also the historical moment where the MAGA Republicans overturn Roe. And so a lot of people are finally tuning in to the fact that in a lot of states, women have lost fundamental freedoms. And so the number of young women,
right?
it's not a hypothetical, right?
It was hypothetical for a long time. Many people, including me, would say, Roe could be overturned. We have to protect access to abortion. We need to codify it in state laws like we have here in my home state of Maine. But so many people said, we have this. Roe is the law of the land. Roe is the standard. It's not, it has bipartisan support. America is a majority pro-choice country. It will not go away. And it did, because of Donald Trump and because Republicans in the Senate who confirmed Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, right? So these things happen over time and lead us to these moments where so much is at stake. And I think this year you see women stepping up and telling their stories in even more powerful ways to help really show what's at stake in this election.
I think one of the other things that we think a lot about here is that in a lot of red states, the state legislatures have been captured by MAGA people. So after, at the federal level, Dobbs was made the law, Roe was overturned, a lot of those states, led by MAGA men, and in some case women too, which still blows my mind, made these laws abolishing abortion, but also making it legally difficult to care for women who are having miscarriages. Yeah. And I think right now, young women in particular are just noticing and realizing that the way that you fix that is through politics. Can you talk a little bit more about how young women are getting engaged, how they're seeing how now politics might really touch their lives when they thought, oh, well, I'm not interested in politics. But before.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to me. I'll tell you a little quick story, which is last night I drove out to a very rural part of Maine. I'm not going to tell you where it is because it was not a public meeting. And I was invited there by a friend of mine who used to be a Republican to come and talk with a secret group of women who have found each other on through Facebook in very rural Maine to talk about the election. I mean, I don't work for the campaign. She invited me as someone who she knows and who she trusts. And more than 50 women came last night.
It's
And
astounding.
we sat for 90 minutes talking about what's at stake. And the age range in the room was from 18 to almost 90. And we were talking about how much is at stake, how many stories are now being told, particularly about abortion, about how abortion was a word you used to only whisper, and now you say it, and now you talk about it like healthcare, how the men in their lives are understanding that they have to vote, not just, vote for the women in their lives, right? For the access to healthcare for the next generation, for the daughters and the granddaughters and the great granddaughters. And I left there so inspired last night, thinking about these women, many of whom had never met each other, or if they had, it was they didn't know each other were political, right? And coming together to say, what can we do? And how can we talk to our neighbors? How can we talk to other women in our community? And, these are women with no formal infrastructure who are just inventing it as they go. And I thought to myself, if this is happening in rural Maine tonight, what's happening all across the country, right? Because we're seeing it. We see it. You saw it at the Democratic convention, right? You saw one woman after another, and you saw that mix. You had Hillary Clinton, right? The ultimate stateswoman for the world, right? And you had AOC, both up there making the case. Two women from very different backgrounds, ironically from the same state, elected, but different backgrounds, different ways they came to office, different ways they came to be engaged, making the case. You see, young people. I live in a college town, and you're seeing the signs start to pop up, and you're seeing the college Democrats organizing. And I think it's a combination of abortion. It's also climate change, right? And it's also because young people don't just care about student loans. They do care about that, but they don't just care about those issues because they come from families where they've watched their families struggle to pay the bills, where they've watched them have to choose between food and medicine, right? And so I think we're at a point now where young people have more information than ever, literally at their fingertips, right? They can look up anything. And if they don't know, they'll figure out how to ask the question to Chat GPT, right? So young people have so much information, and there's such an opportunity for young people to be a decisive voice in this election. And I think that that sort of natural organizing combined with the pure joy and excitement of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is a recipe that could set us up for success.
Right. And when you talk about tools that young people access, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, the social media that they actually access is becoming more and more important. I was just reading this morning about these live side-by-sides where kids who aren't even necessarily old enough to vote will debate each other on live TikTok, and then, get hundreds or millions, thousands or millions of views. That is a brand new thing. I saw also that Kamala Harris did an ad on, or the team is unbelievable. The communications team, they had Kamala Harris speaking side by side with a video game. So the people who watch video games would then see Kamala Harris at the same time.
That I am so not that target audience, but that's amazing. I think this is an example. You have to meet people where they're at, right? Because in this post-pandemic world where people have been physically separated and have come to rely on technology in even more ways, there's an opportunity in that if we look for it, right? There's an opportunity to make connections through those channels. And I also will say the fact that this is really one of the shortest presidential races in history, I think.
Oh my gosh. So
I said to this group of women last night, like, we can do anything for 8 weeks, right?
right.
Like, imagine if you just every day for the next 8 weeks talk to one person you haven't talked to before.
Yes.
Collectively, you'll reach thousands of people, and you only have to do it for 8 weeks. We're not talking about 18 months here. We're not, we're talking about 8 weeks. And
on the same
you can do
time, at the
anything
same
for
side,
that.
Donald Trump has been running for 9 years.
Donald Trump, we know who he is. We
Mhm.
know his pants are always on fire because he's always lying, right? We know what his awful things are. But what we need to be talking about is not what we already know about him. We don't need to be, I mean, young people, a lot of them don't even remember the videotape, Access to Hollywood, or whatever it was right before the election in 2016. They don't remember that, right? But that's not what we need to be talking about. What we need to be talking about is what the future is going to look like. Who's the agent
Right.
for change? And that's Kamala Harris. And what does the future look like under a Trump administration and a Kamala Harris administration? And we see her making that case every day about who's going to have economic opportunity, who's going to be lifted up in our economy. I was at the Portsmouth rally where she outlined her focus on small businesses. I was standing about 20 feet in front of her when she gave that speech, and watching her just speak so beautifully about small businesses as the backbone of our country and how important that is to really be a cornerstone of her economic plan. I thought she gets it. Right. She gets it. She's been at the state and local level. She's been at the federal level. She's been all around the country, and she gets it.
She does. And I think the pivot of looking toward the future has really been helpful for people to get to know her. But going back to meeting people where they are, one of the things that set the stage for her to become the candidate so quickly after Biden withdrew were these Zoom calls that, the Black women got it together in a couple of hours and got thousands of people on a Zoom call because of all of the infrastructure that they built. But then everybody, the white women and the white men and like every single sub slice of America got on a Zoom to raise money and to raise awareness. Can you talk a little bit about how that is different and how the women led the way on that one than
The
what
Black
we've
women
seen
led the
before?
way,
The
right?
Black women
The Black
led the
women
way.
led the way on that. And I think that is really important to not lose sight of, right?
Absolutely.
That Black women have been leading in this nation, not always in formal positions of power, but have been leading in communities and in families and all across America for a very long time. And the fact that that so many thousands of Black women across America got on that Zoom. I know women who were on that Zoom, and the energy they shared after that it was over. I think that sort of energy is contagious, but Black women are leading the way. And I think that they certainly have been for the Democratic Party for a long time. And now here we are in a position to elect Kamala Harris president of the United States. But the thing is, it's also something we all have to own, right? This is not, we cannot sort of just say, Black women, can you fix this for us, right? We have to join together, all of us, right? That is what I think the beautiful diversity we saw on display at the Democratic Convention. I think the fact that the white dudes for Harris got online and got going too, I saw, actually at the Portsmouth rally, I saw 2 different men wearing 2 different white dudes for Harris hats. And I thought, this is really a thing, right? They're wearing them in public. It's just hilarious. But it's about being a part of something and pulling in the same direction. Right. For me, one of my favorite leadership constructs is really just that arrow, right? Where no matter what your role is on the team, you are all headed in the same direction. And I think right now, no matter who you are, where you are in this country, we all need to be pulling in the same direction. And again, Black women have been leading the way. Black women have been laying the groundwork. And it's now time, and all of us need to be stepping up with that same level of commitment, that same level of organization, and to get this done. And I think it's important to say, for all of the joy and for all of the optimism and all of the energy that so many of us are feeling, this race is tight. Right?
Yes.
If it were held today, she would not necessarily win. We have work to do to educate people about who she is, why she's doing this work, and what that future looks like. And we have good news is we have enough time to do it if we work every single day.
Right. And just to let listeners know, we are recording this the morning of the debate. So we don't know how that's going to come out.
No, but
when
we don't
when
know.
we're talking, we have hopes and we have thoughts, but we are not talking post-debate. We're talking
my
pre-debate.
hope is that if we were going to talk post-debate, my hope is that we would say she showed everybody who she authentically is, right? And showed us her leadership, her vision, the fact that she's tough, she's strong, and she's ready. Because I know she is. You know she is. And I think tonight, I'll be interested to see how many people are watching tonight, because I think it's going to be must-see TV for so many people who are tuning in to get to know her for the first time. They know her name now, right? They know she's the vice president, but tonight will be her first opportunity as the candidate for president to really make her case. And I'm really excited about it. Can't wait.
It's really exciting. And a little bit, I'm a little bit apprehensive too, just the way that these things live go.
I'm not a pollster, right? But I imagine the word cloud that would pop up if you polled the women of America who care about this right now. You would have excitement, you would have joy, you would also have nervousness, and you would have fear, right?
Yeah.
Going into this debate, how we feel about this election is that we know what a Trump future looks like because we have lived it already, right? Except he's saying he's going to be a dictator on day one, right? And we know that, and so you can't help but carry some of that dread with you. And you have, the key is you have to let it channel it right into knocking on doors, making phone calls, talking to your friends, having the tough personal conversations. More powerful than any TV ad is a personal conversation with somebody that you know. Yeah.
Because people trust people they know more than they trust some random ad on TV.
But you think about women in leadership, which is sort of where we started this conversation. We are in a time now where you don't really see an image of politics anymore that doesn't include a woman or a woman.
Not if you're
right.
Not in democratic politics.
Not in democratic politics. That is an important caveat. But it's aspiration changing, right? The fact that kids, I mean, look, we have been fortunate enough in our country that Barack Obama has been the president, and there are kids all over America who say, oh, that could be me. And now, we're in a position again, like we were with Hillary Clinton, to really show women and girls that this is what women do. This is how women lead, and women of color. And I think that aspiration changing moment knows no bounds. It knows no bounds for what could come in the future.
I think that's true, but I also think that the fact that Kamala is not talking about breaking the glass ceiling, she's just doing it, right? She's doing the job without calling attention to it. That is something even more special. That
I agree.
That this is not run of the mill, but it's the way things are in the United States right now.
Well, and look at women governors across the country, right? My governor, Janet Mills, your governor, Maura Healey, Tina Kotek out in Oregon, Michelle Lujan Grisham in New Mexico, Laura Kelly in Kansas, right? Gretchen Whitmer, of course. There are so many women governors now that it's a thing, right? It's now, it's not a thing people are surprised by anymore. And I think, again, when you think about that arc of history and how we've gone from it being the exception to increasingly the norm, right? We're not at 50% yet, let's be clear. So we're nowhere near that, but we are making progress, and we're again changing the expectation of what leadership looks like, and now what presidential leadership looks like. And it's a good thing for our country, and it's a really important moment for us when we think about who we are, how we show up in the world, and that Kamala Harris is ready to lead us there.
Right. So you just talked about, all the women governors there are. And I want to talk a little bit about local and state politics. I mean, you talked about the women of Maine who are just starting to know each other in kind of a
through politics. Yeah. I mean,
through politics,
yeah.
through it, but it's still sub rosa. It's still like,
Yeah.
And I want to talk about how women get involved like you did at the state level.
Yeah.
And the sort of the way that this national picture filters down to the states, but also how things are going in the states filters up to the governorships, the top of the ticket, and the national political arena.
So for me, I have my story is actually very, I think it's the elements of it are similar to a lot of women, which is somebody asked me to run, right? So it was May of 2004. I was at a Kentucky Derby party wearing a hat with fruit on it on my head and drinking a mint julep. True story. I was in graduate school. It was a fundraiser for the library and my state senator was there. And I went over to talk to her and said, look, I'm wrapping up my master's degree in a few weeks. I'd love to, I'm really focusing on education policy. Maybe I could send you my resume. Could you help me make an introduction, maybe at the Department of Education, right? And her husband was standing there and he said, Emily, have you ever thought about running for office? And I sort of politely was like, I mean, I'm not one to rule anything out. So, I mean, who knows? But no, I haven't really. And he said, I think we found our candidate. And I said, for what? I didn't know that my state representative had announced he would not seek re-election. And they asked me right then and there, mint julep, fruit hat and all, to run for office. And I went home. I talked to my fiance now my husband about it. He was very supportive. But then I did what I now know is the most stereotypical thing women do when they're asked to run for office. I wrote an email saying, I'm sure you're talking to a lot of qualified people. Please let me know how I can help. And to their credit, Mary wrote me back and said, Emily, we weren't joking. Please say yes. And I did, right? And so that was in May. June 10th, I finished my master's. July 1st, I started a part-time job at the University of Maine. July 6th, I became a candidate. August 15th, I got married. And November 2nd, I got elected in a three-way race here in my community. And I went to the statehouse for the first time in my entire life after map questing and printing off the directions because 2004. And driving myself to, my first orientation at the statehouse. I had never been there. Right. And so when I think about my story, it is really a very stereotypical one, right? It's a great story. It changed my life in every single way, but it absolutely, it is the story of so many women, right?
Yeah.
In fact, last night, this woman came up to me after the talk and she said, I was in college at the University of Maine in 2008 and you were my state representative. And she said, it was the first time I ever understood that young women could be in politics. And I've never forgotten you. And I was speechless.
Right.
And she got a little emotional and she said, can I hug you? And I said, yes, we can hug. And we just talked about how much things have changed, right? And how now that's more the norm. But I think a lot of women still need to be asked, but increasingly they don't need to be asked. They're raising their hand and just doing it.
Mm-hmm. And this sort of leads to a place where I've been doing a lot of thinking, which is, going from the national political to the state political to the personal is how do women conceive of themselves? Like you said, you wrote, how can I be of help? Not even thinking that you could be the candidate because it's, confidence and understanding your place in the world, youth, all these things which kind of keep going as you get older. The whole idea that you would actually have that ability and that power internally to do that is really exciting.
Well, and your name goes on the ballot, but you build a team, right? You have to have support and you have to be willing to ask for it. And I've done a million conversations recruiting women to run for office or helping them affirm that they made the right choice. And I think that for most women, it is not because they always dreamed of being a state representative or a mayor or a senator. It's because they cared about something enough that they were willing to do the terribly unglamorous, horribly bad for your health and your well-being business of running for office, right? Running for office is hard. It is hard.
Yeah.
It is typically very low paying, right? I made $10,000 a year for 10 years in the state legislature in Maine. And I never was there for the money, right? Let's be
Right.
clear.
Yeah. Can't
And
be.
you're not doing it for the money. You're certainly not doing it for the fame, right? You're doing it because you care about something enough that you're willing to go out there, knock on doors, probably be called some names, have nowadays, right? Nowadays, we have conversations with women about personal security,
Mm-hmm.
right? The threat to their safety and what their kids might experience when they go to school. And I think that despite all of that, the fact that people still say yes and raise their hand is because they care about something enough to do this horrible work. And it usually starts, it's not horrible work. I actually love the work, but it's not glamorous. Let's say that. So it usually starts with something personal. Was
Mm-hmm.
it, for me, it was my passion for education, particularly higher education, access, success, affordability, sustainability, and then the economic impact of higher education in the broader community. That is, for me, how I got started in public policy. For other people, it's the quality of the drinking water in their community or the
Mm-hmm.
experience their kid had in school. It's the stop sign that should be a stoplight, right, on their
Mm-hmm.
corner or something similar. And it starts with that, I need to speak up, right? And
Right.
then suddenly you're leading and you're doing even more. And the good news is now there are more and more women in these positions of power at the state and local level, and they're recruiting other women to come join them. And I think it's very exciting to see. But again, it usually starts with, I care about something enough that I'm willing to put myself out there. And it's a very, very brave thing to do.
It is. And it's not something that I've ever done. And I
Yet.
absolutely think that
Yet.
yet. Well, I'm moving to Maine in 2 years.
Okay.
Less now.
Great.
So like,
You can get you involved. Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely. So there's two things I want to unpack from that. One is the support system that women running for office are getting more and more of. And the other is the very deep and talented bench that we're building for the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
So Emily's list is key in the first part, right? Is what kind of resources and training. And so can you talk a little bit more about the growth of ways that women running for office or involved in politics are supported now?
So organizationally, like Emily's list is really sort of the OG, right? Emily's list is for Democratic women. It's sort of that, it's the foundation laying, game changing organization that put infrastructure in place specifically around Democratic pro-choice women, initially for the Senate and Congress, and pretty quickly down ballot to mayors, governors, state legislatures, and more, including Kamala Harris as district attorney in California. Emily's list was in that race.
Mm-hmm.
So Emily's list started, and other organizations have popped up in the last 20 years now. Emerge is a great example. Emerge does training for women who are running for office. Now there are organizations like Vote Mama, right, which is about electing moms, mamas, as they say, of all kinds and stripes to office. And you have more and more infrastructure. You have also more and more infrastructure around young people, right? Something like Run for Something that is another organization that tries to connect resources to people who want to run. But these, somebody has to opt into it still, right?
Yes.
And that's where I think in the community, at the community level, something like Emily's list is out there actually recruiting women into those offices as well. And it becomes very empowering, right? When somebody comes and asks you to run, right? My little example being one of them. But then when you get there, you think to yourself, I'd like some more colleagues so that I'm not the only woman in this room, right? Because women are not all the same, and one woman does not represent all women. And then you get the opportunity out there to say, come join me, let me help you. And so the
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure around what does it take to run for office, right? Every state, the rules are a little bit different. Usually there's, a residency requirement, there's an age requirement, there is a citizenship requirement, there's a
Mm-hmm.
certain number of signatures you need to gather, money you need to raise. But the basic skills are the same everywhere, right? Talking, communication, fundraising, knowing what the laws are, asking people to vote for you, and knowing why you're asking them, like what's your story. And Emily's List is really the shining example of it, but these other organizations that have just transformed the infrastructure supporting women running for office, that it's no accident, right? It's not just because we're nice that we have more women in
Right.
office, right? It's not like America was just like, yeah, let's have some lady governors. No, those lady governors
No.
have been attorneys general, right? They have been leaders in their state legislatures. They've been business owners. They've been teachers, right? They've been members of Congress. They all worked to put themselves in a position to take those executive roles, right? And it is not an accident. It's not just like, oh, let's elect some ladies, right? No, this
Right.
is decades in the making, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon.
It is decades in the making, and I am going to, age myself right now, although I think, a lot of our listeners are kind of right there with me. I don't know if you remember in 1994, there were two women in the Senate, and they would say 2% is fine for milk, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not okay for women in office. And
Mm-hmm. Well, don't forget,
looking at
1992 was the year of the woman, right?
right,
After Anita Hill, when all these women came and got elected to the House, and then Emily's List elected 5 women to the U.S. Senate, right then, and it
oh,
was
90, it was 92, not 94.
well, it was that
Whatever.
at early 90s, right between
Yes.
those election cycles that we upped. It was sort of the wave, right, of women, and we didn't experience it again until 2018. Right. In 2018,
That's
the first election following Trump, that we had again, one of my favorite fun facts from when I was at Emily's List is in 2018, they needed 23 seats to flip the House from Republican to Democrat. And Emily's List flipped 24 seats with women. So that there were also some really nice men elected that cycle, but who flipped seats. But Emily's List helped support 24 flipped seats for women, that women alone changed the majority of the U.S. House, which is pretty cool. Plus, we elected 10 additional women on top of that into Democratic seats. And it, again, overnight changing the face of power in our country to look more like the country. And that's the power of that cannot be underestimated.
and from the group to the individual,
Mhm.
Nancy Pelosi became the most powerful woman this country has ever seen, certainly in the Congress. And I think that
Period. I mean, I would just say
too.
period, right? Not even
Yeah,
just in the Congress, right? And her
I was
example of leadership is so so strong, right? Tough, caring, and one of my favorite lines she ever said at Emily's List event. And she's been known to say some of this pretty often. So, she said, sometimes you have to throw a punch for the children, right? Like she always comes back again to what is her true north, right?
right.
What is the reason she's been doing this very unglamorous work for so long? For the children, right?
Hmm.
And that is why, she puts herself out there. And it's a great example of someone who's been around as long as she has, she still has that true north of why she does this
Hmm.
work. And for her, it's usually for the children.
For the children,
Mm-hmm.
and for the people coming up, and you know and it's not just her in leadership positions. My representative
Catherine
is
Clark.
Catherine Clark,
Yes.
the whip. So
And I was the Democratic leader in the Maine House. I was the minority leader, right?
right.
I was the youngest woman in state history to ever be the minority leader. And I was very proud to be the minority leader who took the majority back while I was the leader, and flipped that seat. But at the time, the 4 top leaders in the Maine legislature was all men, plus the governor was a man, and me. And, I think now that's not, that's not the case, right? Now we have, a woman of color, actually a Black woman, who's the Speaker of the House in Maine. And that's amazing, right? But we've still only had 4 women speakers in Maine history, right?
Right.
For a state that had the very first United States senator elected in her own right, Margaret Chase Smith, who was a Republican. Maine has had a long history of women in politics, but it's still, this kind of change takes time, and leadership takes time. And you see more and more women in leadership roles in state legislatures taking on, mayor's races in big cities and winning. Phoenix, St. Louis, like there's so many women mayors out there now, leading the way, Boston included, Philadelphia. I could keep going. So,
Yeah.
Again, it used to be 1 or 2 examples, and now we have a list everywhere.
Right. But it hasn't happened. We talked about the time lag, but that's not just a time lag. That's an organizational building period.
Yeah.
Like, the organization, Stacey Abrams is a really good example. Another person who
Yes.
led in the state legislature. But it takes lots and lots of cycles to make progress until there's some cataclysmic event, which can...
You reach a critical mass, right?
Right.
But it's the same of like, it's the same thing in sports where you have to, to win 1 point at a time, usually, or 1 score at a time, or in performance, you have to take it 1 note at a time. In my background in music, and in elections, you have to take them 1 at a time. And that's why it's really important you have organizations like Emily's List, or, like the committees, like the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee that focuses on state legislatures, where they're looking at when working back from redistricting, right? After the next census, and saying, we can't start after that to figure out how we're going to be able to be in the majority in as many places as possible, right? We have to start now. And you have, same with House maps, with Senate maps, you have to think ahead, and you think, okay, like what are we building toward? How do we educate this district? How do we engage, right? What is the story we need to tell? How do we connect with people here to change the trajectory of this state legislature? How do we get the right people to run? How do we make sure they have the resources that they need? Right. And I think none of it is an accident, right? There are people who wake up every day thinking about not this election, but the next one or the one after that, and thinking about how do we put the right people in place? We can make good things happen.
Exactly. And redefining winning in some of these reddest places where right now Democrats don't even contest a lot of the seats. So if you can redefine winning as this cycle, we have a candidate, we're funding the candidate,
right?
We're getting more votes than we did last time.
We're talking to more
sometimes
people,
takes,
right?
We're talking to more people.
And I think we've seen Republicans do this too effectively, right? That built towards moments like particularly, 2010 for them in particular, when they won state legislative majorities across the country, including, that's how I became the minority leader after 2010. It was not an accident. That did not happen overnight. That was not a like, oh, look, America elected a lot of Republicans. No, that it was decades in the making. And we have the ability to organize like that too. And so I think the key is the way we do it is we are inclusive. We are centering leaders that look like America, right? Whether it's women of color, people of color, LGBTQ plus Americans, right? Getting us out there, people who come from all walks of life, different races, religions, ages, and saying we want elected officials that look like America. And I think that is makes me really proud to be doing that kind of work.
I think it's so inspiring when you see, your leadership reflecting the people, the entire community, and not just older white men, right?
Right. Some of whom have been really great. Others of whom
Some of
have
them
not.
are,
But
right,
there's no question that to have a representative democracy, we need leaders from all backgrounds,
that's
right?
right.
And I think that is in keeping with the true sort of spirit of America and the opportunity we have in this country, and that we can have and everyone should have. That's what you hear Kamala Harris talking about, that
Right.
opportunity. And there's been some really stark and shocking, really shocks to the system, right? Particularly as we talked about earlier, Dobbs and the fall of Roe, that are real gut check moments, kind of make you say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what am I doing about this? Right.
Exactly.
And
Like Michelle Obama said,
do
don't just
something.
wring your hands,
Yeah.
do something.
Do something. One thing, again, every day for just 2 more months. And then we'll wait a little bit until we get the elections decided, and then we can get back to work preserving democracy and strengthening our democracy and strengthening the economy so that it works for everyone. And I think that Kamala Harris is ready to do that, but we all have to make sure we're helping her along the way. Because just like you don't end up with this many lady governors all at once by accident, we're not going to elect Kamala Harris by accident, right? We're going to have to do
Right.
it with a lot of deliberate determination and hard work, hustle, joy, channeling that fear over the next couple of months to get it done, and really being honest with our friends and our neighbors, our family, about what's at stake and why we care so much. Again, the most powerful thing somebody can do is tell a personal reason why they're looking for someone to support Kamala Harris. And I think that's what everybody needs to do for the next 2 months.
Well, you just took my last question and answered it before I even asked it.
Hey, I love talking about women in politics. It's kind of, it's who I am. It's from whence I come, and it's the work I believe in so much. So women's leadership generally, and I welcome any opportunity to talk about it. And certainly for anyone who's listening, I would say, if you are a woman and you've never considered running for office, consider right now me asking you to put running for office on your list of things to do. And if you are a very thoughtful man listening to this, go talk to a woman in your life and encourage her to run, because we need her, and go support her every step of the way. And I think together we'll get it done.
Thanks, Emily. That was an amazing conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy anytime. I love this kind of stuff.